This is Geek Gab with your host, John and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, October 27th, 2018. A mere 4 days before Halloween. We have on the show today, in addition to my usual fellow host, we have on the show today an author whom I will introduce in but a moment. But before I do, Dornall, how was your week?
Hey, Daddy Warpig. It's been a regular week for me. Work, a little exercise, a lot of gaming. You know how it is. I can't wait to talk to a super smart inventor and author today, because I've been playing so much Terraforming Mars. I want to know how that works. Could that work in real life? Because it doesn't seem like it could.
Do you want to do the introduction?
I can do an introduction. Schantz, author, Brave and the Bold, been with us before. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Schantz.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me on again. I must not have scared you off the first time.
Hey, if he doesn't get rid of me, everybody else is welcome.
I am so exhausted today that I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. I can guarantee you in 2 or 3 weeks I'll have a witty comeback, but today is not working for me. So you just have to schedule your insults for later.
You mentioned Halloween, DW. I'm not a big Halloween guy. Do you have any plans for the semi-holiday?
I don't have any plans for Halloween, like none. I was hoping to watch some horror movies, but things have been very, very just way too busy to hit any horror movies. Not that there's any good ones coming out. We saw Halloween last week, obviously. We talked about it. And the next horror movie that's coming out that was even interesting isn't coming out until November 9th. I mean, what the hell is up with that?
Very strange.
J.J. Abrams' Overlord is what I'm talking about. Not coming out till November 9th, and we may not even review it on the show. Or if we do, we might not do a big review of it because next week on the 3rd, we've got Yakov Merkin coming on the show. Our favorite active duty Israeli Defense Force special fiction, speculative fiction author coming on the show next week. And then the week after that, we have a special guest, someone who, at least tentatively scheduled, of course, who worked on the multiplayer for Halo.
Yeah.
So, huge piece of video game history coming on the 10th. So we may not actually review Overlord. But why would you release a Halloween movie almost 2 weeks after Halloween?
Well,
I don't get that.
Monster movies are timeless and belong at every time of the year. Didn't you know that?
Well, that's true. They did release the 2 of the Halloween movies, and I only know this because I watched Red Letter Media's review last week. 2 of the Halloween movies they actually released in June. So, obviously, I don't have the intelligence or training of a major Hollywood executive, but I would have thought that if you're releasing a movie called Halloween, you would want to do that sometime near the actual holiday and not near, I don't know, Labor Day or whatever other holidays are in June.
Hey, I know a guy up here. I occasionally play Gloomhaven with him. He hosts another podcast called The Bone Bat Show. They do a monster movie, a horror movie film festival in April. I don't know why they do it in April, but I'm going to check that out next year.
Okay, in June we've got Statehood Day, Jefferson Davis's birthday. He was the president of the Confederacy, so obviously that's what they're aiming Halloween at. The big audience who is looking for something fun to do for Jefferson Davis's birthday. Right. D-Day, anniversary of D-Day, Belmont Stakes, Flag Day, Father's Day.
That sounds like the perfect month to release a bunch of patriotic war films.
Something called American Eagle Day that I've never even heard of. This, it's not a public holiday. That's good. Sorry, I'm looking on a website here.
Yeah.
Apparently they have a really
website.
really obscure, like every single obscure holiday you can think of. But that's June for you. I was correct in thinking there was nothing major. I mean, heck, it would be better to release Overlord in June because D-Day happened in June. June 6th would have been a better release time for Overlord because Operation Overlord was the invasion of Normandy. It was D-Day. And this is a story about a racially and sexually diverse group of Allied soldiers behind the lines of D-Day who stumble upon a Nazi plot to create zombies of some form or another. And in order to save the life of one of their own people, they inject him with the zombie juice. And I'm guessing things don't go well thereafter.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put this out there just for everybody listening. Let's not release that on the anniversary of D-Day.
You don't think so? You think that would be like irreverent or disrespectful?
I think maybe those are the words that came to mind. So let's be respectful of Halloween then.
You think it would destroy the feeling and mood of the D-Day Halloween season or D-Day holiday season? Okay, that's a respectable position, at least. We didn't hit the news last week because we wanted to skip over that and got directly into reviewing the movie. So we've got a few pieces of news here. The new season of speaking of D-Day and invading Nazis. Watch this. Hey, check this out. Check this out, okay? I have worked fully half a second on this smooth transition. Speaking of D-Day and invading Nazis, there's a new season of Man in the High Castle out on Amazon.
They made another one?
A third season, yeah. It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Have you seen these?
I haven't seen the new season because, as I mentioned previously, I am way busy right now, and I hope to schedule it in the next couple of weeks, but that may not happen.
Well, I watched the first season and dropped out of the second. Hans, did you see any of them?
No, I have not seen it.
Okay, well, let me save you a click. The writing isn't up to Philip K. Dick's standards. Only one of the characters is interesting and worth watching. And spoiler alert, it's the Nazi.
That's true. The Nazi himself, the Nazi captain. He's an American,
right? An American who is an officer in the Nazi government or in the Nazi military in America.
He absolutely fabulous performance. Absolutely just a character. He makes the show. All the other people you're supposed to care about, you just don't. But I hope to see that. Speaking of third seasons of shows on streaming news sites, wow, that transition. I should get an Emmy for these or whatever they give out for YouTube podcasts. Daredevil Season 3 came out last week and is getting good reviews from most people, despite the political stuff they threw in for no good reason.
Oh, have you? I'll have to catch up with the Razor Fist review on that. I stopped watching Daredevil after the hallway fight scene.
I haven't seen Daredevil Season 3 again because I've been busy, and I'm hoping to get that scheduled in the next few weeks. I'm currently in the middle of watching something. It's a marathon watching of something for a eventual review. And so I haven't been able to watch that either. It's disheartening. And it's kind of amusing that Daredevil 3 is getting such good reviews, And here's a transition to another piece of news I had when Luke Cage and Iron Fist were both canceled for a good reason.
I'm shocked.
I'm on 4 hours of sleep, and I am knocking these transitions.
And we're just letting you go, man. We're just letting you go. What else do you have in your news in the newsreel?
I did want to say this real quick about Luke Cage and Iron Fist. I watched the first season of both of them. I watched everything leading up to Defenders. And then I watched the second season of Jessica Jones, and then I watched The Punisher. And the shows are not getting any better. I have not seen the second season of Luke Cage or Iron Fist. Apparently, they're just as bad as the first seasons. That's the reviews I've heard from several people. And I wasn't interested. It's not like I was, I wasn't interested in spending another 13 hours each, 26 hours in total, watching that. And so seems like that's not an uncommon opinion because Netflix is canceling them. And I'm just as happy with that. All right. I mean, unless somebody's going to come out with a huge case as to why Iron Fist season 2 and Luke Cage season must-see television, they're gone, and I'm just waiting for the shoe to drop on Jessica Jones, and then eventually Daredevil. It is inevitable at this point, it seems to me.
That's a shame.
It is.
It's just television. It's in a way it's better than what we used to get back when we had to sit in front of the TV and watch commercials. And in another way, it's a lot worse because the good quality shows are just as hard to find.
Yeah. Netflix puts out a lot of trash.
And honestly, we're going to hit market saturation really soon. All these different companies are starting their own services. CBS wants to host their own stuff. Disney wants to host their own channel and everything like that. It's going to be back in the days of cable television. I remember everybody would say stuff like, well, gosh, if they just let me buy channels a la carte, I would like it. But I don't want to pay for this big cable package with 1 million channels, right?
We've had the Disney services warming up. CBS has been running since the introduction of Star Trek Discovery, STD. Brilliant name, which is terrible. I watched the first half season of that awful show. And then DC Universe just launched with its own original show, and it's just too much money, too much pain in the rear to try and get all of that. I mean, I got Prime Video because I subscribe to Amazon Prime because I get enough stuff from Amazon to make it worthwhile to save on shipping. And I get a bunch of free videos with that, and that's barely worth checking out most of the time. And they've actually got some really good shows on there. They've got all the Batman, the animated series shows. They stole that from Netflix. They've got all the seasons of The Expanse, and plus a bunch of original shows, which, while not being, shaking the market, there's a lot fewer of them, but apparently a lot better than Netflix's stuff. They're a lot better reviewed. So,
I hear you. Unfortunately, the more stuff to watch turns into trash. I think we're gonna have less to talk about on the Geek Gab. Wouldn't that be nice?
Less trash. Okay. Well, we have. Let's talk about the Brave and the Bold.
I was gonna say, it doesn't sound like our guest likes TV.
Well, I was going to butt in that I really appreciate Amazon Prime's classic sci-fi series. They have Babylon 5 up for free viewings. I've been going back and looking at some of those episodes, and I see they also have Stargate Atlantis, which had a few memorable episodes. So I really actually prefer Amazon Prime to Netflix these days for my movie watching.
Oh, I think I just picked up a trial of Amazon Prime. I'm gonna, you know what? Next week is Lost. I'm gonna catch up on Bab 5.
You know what? I have seen all of Babylon 5. Seen the original series, and then the 2 or 3 movies they released after the series ended. And I have also, it's a good show. It's a really enjoyable show. It's 5 seasons. It's worth watching if you haven't seen it. It's good science fiction television. I haven't seen any Stargate beyond 1 episode. And it's not because I hate it or I'm avoiding it or I'm rejecting it. I just, life is busy and I haven't been able to schedule that either.
The quality of Stargate is a bit mixed, I think, but it does have a number of really good, memorable episodes and certain places in the series where the characters are hitting off each other very well and ended up being extremely entertaining.
I was watching a YouTube channel last week who their speciality, it's called Space Doc, and their speciality is science fiction vessels, ships from science fiction shows. They do very fascinating videos talking about a breakdown of what classes of ship there are, what capabilities they have, dissecting any particular specific ships from shows, things like that. Well, one of the videos I watched was about Stargate. I believe it was the original one. And the person was mentioning that they've got a ship at some point during the series. But the great thing about the show is that you could look at any random picture of the decks or the bridge of the ship, and you could say, all right, this particular piece of equipment they discovered in this show, and that's why it's useful and part of the bridge of the ship. That particular metal that this is made of, they discovered in this other show. And the entire ship is a accumulation, a product of the accumulation of technology from various worlds they've reached through the Stargate that the Earthlings have managed to put together. And it's almost a history of the show. They have very good continuity with that. I don't know that that is the case, but that's what this YouTube channel, Moogle, this YouTube channel broadcaster seemed to think. And I thought that was fascinating. I think that's a brilliant way to put together a series, to show the effects of it.
I'm a bit of an aficionado of old test equipment. This is RF signal generators and things like that are archaic, that, using vacuum tubes and cathode ray tubes and displays and so forth. And I was really, I got a tickle out of watching Stargate because, at least I think it was Stargate Atlantis, whoever was doing their set design would recycle some of the same archaic 30 or 40-year-old pieces of Hewlett-Packard RF test equipment over and over and over again with slightly different configurations on various alien worlds. It was a bit of unintentional humor in the series.
So, like I said, I don't have anything against the series. I just haven't had the time to watch it. But I've heard very good things about it. And, if it sounds interesting to the audience, apparently it's on, or at least Stargate Atlantis is on Amazon Prime Video. So, yeah, Amazon Prime, you get it for free. All right, let's jump in to your book. It's the third of a series.
Yeah, the Brave and the Bold is the third book in my Hidden Truth series. I can go into my lengthy monologue describing the series if you'd like me to.
Now, here's the interesting thing. I think the last time you were on the show, you were talking about this, that we're going into developing the next series, and the first book in the series hadn't even come out yet.
No, I think the first book had, and the second book had come out a year ago. I'm on the book a year plan, and I'm not quite managing that. It's ending up being about 15 months or so between releases. But my books are set in an overarching universe. It's a mix of secret history and alternate history up until the branch point where it turns into alternate history is when Gore defeats Bush in Florida, winning the 2000 election. But then the 9/11 terrorists attack the White House and the Capitol, and we end up with President Lieberman. But up before that branch point, it's effectively the same history as our own. But over the course of my books, we discover that there is a secret cabal behind the scenes, pulling the strings, trying to consolidate power and reshape civilization to make the world more easily ruled. And that secret history really motivates the series, because my hero, a high school student in the first book, discovers some subtle clues to the secret history and to physics discoveries that have been suppressed. And that leads him into contact with the evil conspiracy. In the second book, the hero and his friend go off for their freshman year at Georgia Tech and have to fight the conspiracy's attempt to implement a social justice convergence on their college campus. And now in the third book, The Brave and the Bold, the summer after my hero's freshman year, they're off to infiltrate the cabal's summer meeting on Jekyll Island, Georgia, which has a historical significance as the location where the group of bankers met to plot and plan out the implementation of the Federal Reserve System. So my heroes are trying to infiltrate this meeting of the cabal to stop the cabal's evil scheme to initiate a Middle East war in Iraq, which had not happened on that timeline yet. And then the G8 summit is immediately following, and they're trying to get in and thwart the cabal's evil schemes to take over the world.
I like it. Honestly, it's one of those things there where it's starting to sound just like reality.
Reality has converged amazingly well to my story. I started off in book one, where the cabal was using these phony FBI agents who were in on the cabal and doing the cabal's evil bidding and eliminating people who were getting too close to the secrets. And it's worked out very nicely. In fact, I made the tagline for book three, "Where we go one, we go all." Because there's kind of a shout out to the whole Q conspiracy, where my heroes and their allies are working in parallel with the Q conspiracy in this alternate universe to try to change the course of history.
I love it. It's one of those things where I guess maybe it's just current year politics and the way America's working right now. It's fascinating to find out that the conspiracy theories you read about and saw on TV aren't exactly true, but there are weird things. There are weird and strange people and forces pulling strings.
Oh, absolutely. One of the gimmicks that I use in my writing is when I'm introducing a conspiracy, the stranger and more outlandish the factoid I drop into my book, the more likely it is to be the honest to goodness truth. So a lot of my fans have a bit of discombobulation when they start Googling some of the strange things that happen in my book and realize that all that stuff that I'm talking about really happened.
That's cool.
Like, for instance, in my book, the bad guys are talking about how they used to exert control over the elites through blackmail and coercion. And one of the techniques that they used is all of the students attending Ivy League schools were forced to submit to a nude photograph as a part of a supposed study of posture and scoliosis. And it turns out all that really did happen. And, for about 30 years or so, anyone who attended an Ivy League school, there was a nude photograph taken of them. And in my book, the evil conspiracy was using that to blackmail certain people who are very sensitive to those kinds of disclosures. Nowadays, of course, they're using much more sophisticated electronic surveillance methods to implement their blackmail.
That's interesting. That they'd actually do that. And am I the only listener who immediately checked his posture and straightened up when you started talking about that?
They're watching,
Hey, actually, we've got some great comments from the chat. John Mollison says he's already halfway through Brave and the Bold. He says he's loving it. It's light on action, but the in-jokes are tickling his funny bone.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of hidden references to things like the QAnon movement and various conservative figures and publications, and a lot of real world people make appearances in the book. Of course, the copyright disclaimer in an entirely fictional way, particularly the ones who are still alive, where I have to be very careful.
Let me ask a question as far as writing a book with alternate history in it. Even if I have heard, and I understand the point of this, I understand where the person's coming from, that as you're writing alternate history, the accumulation of differences as a series goes on places a greater and greater burden on the audience to keep up with how this world is different from our world, notwithstanding the convergence of the two recently alluded to on this very show. As an author, how do you deal with that? Is there a lot of things that you need people to keep in mind, or?
Well, it's actually, there is a bit of that, and that does pose something of a challenge. But really what I'm doing is retelling the events of our own timeline from the perspective of this alternate timeline in which my hero and his opponents are dueling with each other. For instance, there's a mention of the scheme that is underway among the evil cabal to loot the economy using I think I called it the toxic assets requisition plan, but they'll come up with a better name for that when they actually spring it on the public. So I'm using things like the real financial collapse that took place in our timeline as being elements of the fictional universe in my stories. So there is a great deal of linkage between the current events and events of the last 10 years or so. My book is set in an alternate The Brave and the Bold is set in an alternate 2006. So the housing crisis and collapse is the bubble is just coming to a head, and the evil conspiracy is talking about how they're using this to their advantage.
When you're looking at extrapolating things, there's a lot of people, and I understand where they're coming from, and it can make for an interesting novel, but I don't think that if you're concentrating on this, that you're concentrating on the most important parts of a novel. And I'm about to say what that is. If you are writing an alternate history novel and your goal in creating your alternate history is to rigidly extrapolate all consequences of a change, you may produce an interesting novel, but you're ignoring the most important parts so it should be, which is the story. And I'm not saying you personally are doing that. It sounds like you're not, because what you're doing is you're taking real world events and you're using them for dramatic impact and to make the story better and to improve the narrative and things like that to make it more interesting. So have you at all looked at like the several different, I don't know, schools of thought as far as they call them allo-historical novels are concerned? Did you just say, hey, you know what, forget it, I'm writing something I think is cool, I'm going to run with that?
Well, honestly, the latter. I mean, what I did was on the first page of my first book, The Hidden Truth, we learn that President Gore was killed by the 9/11 hijackers, and President Lieberman took charge and spoke to the nation, and that's really it. And then that's pretty much the end of the alternate history in book one. I just wanted to set it up in an alternate history universe because the kinds of events that my hero is involved in are, of course, completely inconsistent with what really happened in that time period. And the things that are happening, particularly as you get into the second and certainly into the third book, are so wildly at divergence with real current events. It just made more sense to adopt the fictional ploy of using this alternate history setting in which I could change the events around, and no one can take issue with them because, hey, it's my universe, and if I want to have President Lieberman choose Senator McCain as his running mate, I can do that, and no one can stop me.
I think that in general, speculative fiction authors tend to get lost in the intellectual aspects of things and tend to forget writing a story that has a visceral impact. They focus on all the wrong things to make great stories that have a visceral impact. I think an obsession with that has really damaged public perception of the genre for the last 80 years or so. But I'm really glad, because the way you did it is I think the way that you should be done. You need to focus on writing a great story with great characters that are colorful people first. The interesting characters that the audience can be drawn in for and care about and stuff. But that's I don't want to get off into a ramble here. I'm going to instead pause and beat my fellow host over the head until he asks you a question.
Oh no!
Yeah, that really happened.
I don't have a question, but I do have a thought. I appreciate the way you went at the alternate history, not just because you have the freedom to pretty much do whatever you want, but here's a thought experiment. Let's say that you're always writing your series in the present day, which is fun and it's common. If you want to continue to write your series in the present day, every few years you would need to update the world to fit what the current events are. And on the other hand, you want the events of your story to change the world, especially in a setting such as yours, where you're actually dealing with forces that change history. So you have to make that decision, and you have no choice but to diverge.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's specifically why my story is not set in the present day. It's set, well, the first book was set in like 2004, 2005. The second book was the 2005, 2006 academic year. And the third book is the summer of 2006. And I choose that time setting because it's not too far in the past. Most of my readers are going to have some recollection of the events, so it's not going to be anything foreign or strange to them if I'm talking about Al Gore and Lieberman and so forth. But at the same time, we have the benefit of hindsight. I can talk about how, we're plotting in a couple of years to have this bubble collapse and have a huge government bailout that will enrich the evil conspiracy. And of course, we know from our perspective, on our timeline, something very much like that actually happened. And I think it adds to the interest and the realism of what's ultimately a fictional story when I can create kind of a secret history of our own times, but set in this alternate universe where the rules are a lot looser and freer on how my characters can go about it. And in particular, how my characters can make fundamental, decisive changes in world events to make things better and defeat the evil conspiracy, or at least thwart the evil conspiracy's plans.
So here's my follow-up question then, because I love it all. Do you plan on, because in our wacky timeline, we have one particular individual who may be defeating the evil conspiracies if they exist. Do you plan on incorporating our current president into your timeline?
I really haven't decided yet, because in my timeline, actually my heroes are going to be instrumental in eliminating one of the primary. In book 3, it's kind of alluded to, but my hero's actions end up ending the career of a very prominent Democratic politician. In another book or two, we'll be getting to the 2008 election. And I was planning on making that kind of an accelerated version of what happened in 2016. And I hadn't decided whether I would introduce Donald Trump as a character, where, of course, it would be, I'd be much more tightly constrained. I've been considering using Aaron Rousseau as a presidential candidate. Now, Rousseau was going to run for the governor of Nevada, but ended up dying of cancer, which is a fate that happens to the opponents of the cabal, end up dying early, young, of mysterious ailments if they are thwarting the cabal or standing in the cabal's way. So I thought using Aaron Rousseau as kind of a political stand-in for a Donald Trump-like figure would probably be a good alternative. But I really haven't decided if Donald Trump is going to run for president in 2008 in my fictional universe, or if the political hero will be someone like Aaron Rousseau.
Yeah, that might be wise to use a stand-in just to avoid the whole possible controversy. Donald Trump can remain just a real estate mogul and reality TV star in your alternate universe.
Well, I'm actually working. I was invited by Daniel Humphreys, who is the author of the Z-Day zombie apocalypse series that I'm not normally into horror and zombies, but he's such a good writer that he really drags me into his stories. He invited me to contribute a story to his a short story collection set in his universe, and I'm planning on having it set in my timeline's future of 2018, which is when he has his story set, and have my characters marveling at you'll never believe who's president on this strange timeline. It's Donald Trump, and having a good laugh about that completely improbable and unrealistic sequence of events. If you look at enough timelines, even something as crazy as that will eventually come up. And by the way, did you know the Cubs actually won the World Series? So that's a screwed up timeline. I
was just about to say the exact same thing.
I'm looking forward to that story.
This is the strangest timeline ever.
Well, and then of course there's going to be a zombie apocalypse in it. So it's a really strange timeline.
Wow.
I caught a continuity error in his book that I don't think he had realized was there, because he specifically had mentioned that the Cubs did not win the World Series. So that's actually going to give me a divergence point between our own timeline and the zombie apocalypse timeline of his fictional universe. So one of the premises of my alternate history series is that there is a technology that will allow you to communicate and even interact with and travel to these alternate parallel timeline universes. I haven't introduced that yet, but my characters are working on the fundamentals of it. I wanted to make sure I had the core timeline that my stories are set in well developed and well fleshed out and stable before ripping it to shreds with, well, let's go to this universe where something different happened.
Yeah, when you're dealing with multiple cross universes in a piece of work, it's kind of difficult to get the audience to come along with you and remember what each of those is. Sliders got out of it by just not caring. They just went to a new one every episode, and they really, for the most part, never ever went back. So they didn't have to care. But and I guess with one short story, it doesn't necessarily signify much either. But on a continuing basis to establish it, it's hard enough to establish characters that the audience can keep in their minds as being very distinct from each other, let alone trying to do it with entire universes.
Oh, absolutely. And it's extremely dangerous as an author to start playing that multiple timeline game, because then you kind of lose connection with, well, what reality are we in, and what are the fundamentals of this fictional universe? I mean, it's tough enough to create a credible fictional universe that will drag your reader in and make them comfortable and make them feel the story is well grounded, so that then they can just focus on the events and the characters and the actions. If you're doing that and then jumping haphazardly into all kinds of different multiple universes where the rules are different, then it really is tough to carry your reader along with that. And you'll notice that some of the most effective uses of that technique are where the story is focused on a principal timeline and just has an occasional diversion into this, what if mirror universe. I mean, Star Trek is the prime example. In the original series, they had the one episode where you got to go to the mirror universe and see evil Spock with a beard and look at some of the consequences of, what if our heroes, instead of being paragons of virtue, were paragons of vice, and what interesting storytelling opportunities came out of that. But if that was every episode, it would lose its impact, and instead of being a particularly creative and engaging storytelling concept, it would just rip the whole fictional universe apart and lose the reader's interest.
One of the things I found is difficult if you have a I mean, and again, it ties into my earlier question, is having enough details of an alternate history to keep the audience enthralled or up to speed on what's happening and why. And then, every time you add a new universe, that just compounds the difficulty. So it's definitely a very fine line to walk.
Oh, absolutely. And, even though ultimately I'm planning on going that way in my series, I mean, I still am not comfortable I have my fictional universe well enough grounded to be able to, survive that kind of storytelling tension by starting to jump around alternatives to my fictional universe. So I'm taking a go slow approach to it and making sure my prime fictional universe is well developed over several books before I start introducing that additional element to it.
Now, I've actually read both of the two Z-Day novels that are currently out, and and it is it's kind of interesting about how he went about doing it and some of the things that happened, especially in book 2. I'm being super vague because it's really difficult to discuss any of that without giving away some spoilers. But if you're at all like fiction, it's called the Paxton Locke series, Locke, by Daniel Humphreys. I've read two of the books, both of the books in that series so far, and so I've enjoyed. I'm sorry, Paxton Locke is his urban fantasy series. My bad.
Right.
Z-Day, the Z-Day series. I've actually read the first Paxton Locke. Downloaded the second one last week, but haven't had a chance to read it because life is really busy right now. I think there's a thing coming out through this, but if you do have a chance, if you want to check it out, A Place Outside the Wild is the first one, and A Place Called Hope is the second one, and they're both good books. I've enjoyed both of them.
Oh, I agree completely, and in fact, I've had the honor and privilege of being asked to read his third book, and other than the fact that there's an evil nanotechnology scientist named Dr. Schantz in it, who doesn't. Well, I don't want to give a spoiler, but let's just say there is also an IT specialist named Daniel Humphreys in book 3 of The Brave and the Bold. So we're dueling with each other's red shirt characters in our relative fictional universes.
That's great.
Now, we're getting on towards the end of the show, and as we start to wind things down, I had another question, and I don't know if you can talk about this yet. Can you talk about this yet, if you know what I'm talking about?
I think I can. Officially, I have a physics paper which will be coming out on Monday in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London. And it's all about a different perspective, a different way of looking at electricity and magnetism. It's a way that I think is more intuitive than the more mathematical traditional treatments. And I think it shows how classical electromagnetics naturally leads to a pilot wave interpretation or model of quantum mechanics, which of course has a lot of potential to resolve a lot of the ambiguities and contradictions that people ascribe to quantum mechanics. And in fact, I've been working on these electromagnetic ideas pretty much all of my career, from my doctoral dissertation through applying some of these ideas to how do you design ultra-wideband antennas, and more recently, how can you take an understanding of how electricity and magnetism work and use it to make near-field wireless links, radio links that use very low frequencies or very long wavelengths and accomplish things that you just can't do with conventional wireless techniques. But I finally have all those ideas pretty well pinned down in a unified whole coming out in that paper. So there'll probably be some additional press and information coming out on those discoveries in the next week or so. But from the fictional point of view, I still have difficulty understanding why the ideas that I've stumbled across weren't identified 100 years ago by people like Heaviside and Heinrich Hertz and Oliver Lodge and their contemporaries. And that was a big motivation in writing The Hidden Truth, to put those ideas into a fictional setting where, well, if they didn't come out, it must be because some evil conspiracy is trying to suppress them, is trying to throttle the advance of science and technology. And why would they be wanting to do that? Well, because they want to maintain control and take over the world. And that was a bit of the premise behind the fictional universe in which I ended up setting my stories. And my hero's introduction to it is in discovering obscure references in old physics books that present this idea that then had been suppressed by the evil cabal. So that's the idea that ultimately inspired me to develop my fictional universe and write my science fiction.
That's wonderful. First of all, congratulations on getting that all wrapped up and put together. I'm really excited to hear about that.
That's a big coup, getting a paperly. It will make enough waves that if it proves to be a useful model in describing fundamental physical forces of the universe, it'd be interesting to see how that reverberates around the physics community.
It's going to be, Well, it's going to be kind of interesting because conventionally, physics is done in a very mathematical perspective, and there's a mathematical element to what I've done, but it really isn't anything that is beyond or contradicts the classical Maxwellian picture of electricity and magnetism. It's just taking the math and associating a different physical picture with it. What I think is a simpler, more intuitive physical picture with how things work, to give a basis for having a clear mental image of what fields are doing and how they're interacting and how they're carrying energy from place to place. So, and that isn't the usual kind of physics advance that you typically read about. So it will be very interesting to see how well it's received.
Well, before we kick off,
you got chopped up there for a second, D-Dub.
Oh, I'm asking if you guys have any last thoughts before we kick off.
You first. Hey, actually, I'm really excited to hear about this, about your paper. Are you going to send us links and everything so we can read that up later?
Yes, I have been talking with one reporter who I understand is working on a article on it. I don't know the details of that, so I'm not sure if and when that's coming out. But I will certainly be talking about it and on my Twitter feed, and I'll make a point of sending you guys some more information. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to come on some other time and talk about it further.
Cool.
Any last thoughts, Dornall?
Well, thanks for coming on and chatting with us. It's really fun and interesting to hear about your alternate history. And as usual, thanks to everybody in the chat hanging out with us live and talking with us and the guests.
Well, thank you all very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. I like watching Geek Gabs, even though I don't normally get a chance to participate in them live. I do tend to watch them on YouTube. You guys always have an interesting collection of guests, and I'm honored and delighted that you let me on your show.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the audience listening. And apparently I'm breaking up, so I'll make this very, very quick. This is Geek Gab. We're here just about every Saturday, just about this time. Listen to us live on YouTube. We are letting you go for today, but don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.